Okay, so and the reason recording this is so important is this seminar will be posted on our website. So you can come back and reference it, and you can share it with board members and administrators at your school who you think would be this would be of value to. I get really excited about this topic, so if I start talking super fast, just type in the text to slow it down. It's just something I get really passionate about. So here we go. I'm going to talk about board meeting structure. And you're going to need to make sure you're unmuted because you're going to have to talk. But let's talk for a few minutes about why do we have board meetings?
Well, it's been mentioned a couple times, but boards are all about governance. It's the quality assurance check, if you will, of what our charter specifies.
I like that, the quality assurance check. That's a great thing. We're quality assurance people. Why else do we have board meetings? Okay, if we boil it down, I really like Ryan's quality assurance. It's to assure that we're achieving what we said we would and that we're avoiding unacceptable actions. So we're not in the press for doing things illegally. And that's important. Avoiding unacceptable actions and situations is super important. And if we really boil it down, boards that govern for greatness ask wise questions about things that truly matter to the school. So if we're trying to hold ourselves accountable to our charter and make sure that we're doing what we're supposed to, we're going to ask wise questions about things that matter. So board meeting effectiveness, we really want to make sure that we're preparing agendas and presentation we're preparing our agendas in advance, that we are presenting well, and that we're really developing strategy. They're really the three components of board meeting effectiveness. And if we're not doing one of them, it's like that three-legged stool. If you're not really well in your preparation for a board meeting, your chair or your school isn't going to be stable. If you're not able to present and discuss and be productive in a board meeting, again, it's not stable. And if we never get to strategy, we always spend all of our meetings focusing on what's happened in the past. We're just not a stable chair. We're not able to move forward. We really get stuck in the past, which defeats the purpose of charter school of being innovative. We can't be innovative if we're always looking back. Am I going back to the library? Oh, yeah. So one thing that we really need to look at is our scheduling. How often do you think a board meeting should meet? So go ahead and come off mute and join in and tell us, how often should a board be meeting? Kind of got three answers up there. I probably should have put a little poll up. But should we meet twice a month, monthly, every month, once a quarter? What do you think is most effective?
I think that the public school boards should probably meet more often. When I was at an independent school, they would meet quarterly is all, or sometimes twice a year, but they would meet for several days. So I guess the short answer is as often as they need to. In order to do their work. And some of the stuff in a public school like us, there are certain things that the state requires them to do. So it's going to be at least often enough to do that. Certain things they have to do, certain things they have to review. But yeah, I mean, I think more often than less with a public school, and once a month seems to be kind of the minimum, seems to me.
Okay, anybody else want to weigh in on that one?
This is Carrie.
Okay, go ahead, Terry.
Oh, we can read that as well. It's probably similar to some of their thoughts. It's fairly established school, and so you look and you say, well, do we need to meet monthly? Would every other month work? And then if we did need it, something needed to be approved, or we could always schedule a meeting, but I'm kind of looking at it coming from fairly established charter school. It seems like about every other month works well for us.
Mhm.
I think that's really important too, to distinguish the difference between a well-established school and a startup school. Startup schools are going to find themselves probably needing to meet twice a month, where a really established school should probably meet monthly. It's
Mhm.
really tempting to go to that every other month model, but the minute you do that, you're really not governing as effectively as you could be.
Mhm.
Um, because you're spending all of your time then just taking care of what needs to be done, and you become very reactionary. You don't allow for any strategic development or strategic planning in your board meeting.
Mhm.
So I really think that it's best to meet monthly. However, in Utah, we find really 10 months of the year is sufficient, that
Yeah.
it's typical in a normal non-COVID-19 year to not meet in July.
Yeah.
That was not the case this year. I'm sure boards had to meet maybe 1 or 2 times in July to make sure they got their reopening plans approved. So typically a board should meet every month, but we usually skip July, and then the holidays get really difficult. So it's really hard to have a board meeting between, say, Thanksgiving and New Year's.
Mhm.
So that kind of gives us a 10-month cycle for our board meetings.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then how long should they last? A board meeting should never go more than 2 hours. I've
Mhm.
sat in a lot of board meetings, and you can tell when you hit the 2-hour mark. Um, they become really ineffective. You start to see a lot of drifting and side conversations. Um, People kind of get bored, they lose a train of thought. It's just the same as in school. We don't go 2 hours for our students without a break and a transition of topics. Board meetings are the same way. As adults, we're not just developed to go longer than 2 hours. So if your meetings are lasting more than 2 hours, you are not harnessing the power of committee. You're not able to delegate things to a group of people that could synthesize information and bring it to the full board. You're focusing way too much on detail. If you're spending more than 2 hours, you may be getting into the weeds and doing things that you've hired a very competent director or CEO to take care of. Let that CEO take care of the things you've hired him to. So you may be focusing too much on your details. Um, you may be just not becoming to your meeting prepared. If we're above that 2-hour mark, maybe we're spending too much time going through reports and documents that were submitted that we should have all been reasonable, responsible adults and read prior to coming to the meeting. So make sure that you're taking care of being prepared. And then the other thing you may not be doing is simply sticking to your agenda. One of my favorite boards to go watch is George Washington Academy, and they have a really fun trick for keeping their board meetings under 2 hours. They set their agenda, and when they first arrive at their board meeting, the board chair asks, "How long do you think it's going to take us to get through the agenda?" And every board member gives a time as to when they believe the board meeting will end. And they kind of jockey and joke around it. Some will say, well, I think it's 8:17. Somebody will be like, no, I'm going to go with 8:22. But everybody kind of comes up with a time as to how long they think the information that is on the agenda is going to take to discuss. And then when they get to that time, when they hit that 8:22 mark, that board chair does a wonderful job. She says, we have now come to the time that we believed we would finish the discussion of this board meeting, and we would cover the agenda information. Is there anything on this agenda that is still relevant and important that needs to be discussed today, or can we table it into the next meeting? So really valuing that board meeting or board members' time by saying, hey, if we don't need to talk about something tonight, then let's simply put it on the next agenda. So that's a strategy to kind of make sure you're staying under 2 hours. But really remember, all of your board members are professionals, and they could be lawyers, and they could be stay-at-home moms, they could be accountants, but there is a price to all of their time. Regardless of what they're doing, there is a significant price, and we want to honor that. So they shouldn't be more than 2 hours. So I really like this, scheduling out our board calendar and making sure that we're staying strategic in our board meetings. So this is an exercise I really recommend that every board do, at least every 3 or 4 years. I don't believe you have to do it every year because your calendars will kind of recycle. But I think you should take and 12 big flip chart papers and hang them around the room, label each one a month of the year, and then start putting on the flip chart paper, what needs to happen in that month at your board meetings. So an easy way to do this is to start with finance. We know in June, we have to approve our final budget. So on your June paper, you would write approve budget. And then you need to start thinking back as to what needs to happen for that to be approved. Well, that means in May, we should have a public hearing. And then that means in January, we should have set some strategic goals so that we can make sure our budget reflects those goals of the following year. And so you're going to map that backwards. We're going to do that with finance. We're going to do that with academics. When do we receive academic goals? We're going to do it with policies. Some policies are required by law to be visited every year. You need to approve your fee schedule by March 1st. So that means you've got to hear that in January and February because you have to hold it at 2 meetings prior to. So your fee waiver policy and your fee policy, that's going to be revisited every year and should be written on your January paper. So if you will spend, maybe it takes an hour to do this, but it will really allow you to generate a really solid board calendar of when things are typically coming forward. You can put when you're going to get test results. We typically get the statewide test results in the summer, so we might want to look at them in August. And then when we have months that don't have a lot in there, we can start plugging in some strategic things we want to look at and evaluate as we move forward. And this scheduling allows us to focus on strategy as well as be reactionary. So when we're setting up our meeting, kind of what should a timetable for each meeting look like? And I believe the day after your last board meeting is when you should start creating your next agenda. So the day after the board meeting, I really believe the board chair and the CEO should sit down and do a debriefing meeting, and that leads naturally into drafting the next agenda. Things that we didn't get covered or maybe were tabled will go on that agenda, things we need to be doing looking forward. Then 4 weeks before the board meeting, which is really that right after that drafting meeting with your CEO and board chair, send out the sample agenda to the whole board so that they can weigh in. They may have something that they think is really important and they can add that there. Or if they're working as a committee chair, something their committee has discussed that should be on that next agenda. Then 2 weeks before your board meeting, you should incorporate all the comments that have been received from the board members and from committee chairs and finalize your agenda. And then 1 week before, you need to make sure that we're getting out a full board packet that includes all of the supplemental meeting materials. So if you're going to talk about a policy, it has a copy of the policy. We have a copy of the finances. So that gives your board members a full week to read that advanced material and come to your board meeting ready to discuss, so that we're not spending board meeting time reading the material. So it's really just a nice schedule, and this allows us to really focus on moving forwards and be strategic and not reactionary when we're preparing it ahead of time. If we wait till just the week before to prepare that agenda, we don't have time to prepare any strategic information. The only thing that's going to make it onto that agenda is reactionary stuff that has to be taken care of right this moment. So in August, something that might be reactionary on that agenda is going to be your early literacy plan. It's just got to be done, and so it's on there. But we didn't spend the time maybe in June to start discussing the goals of our charter and how that implements in with that early literacy plan to make sure we're really creating a plan and providing resources in the budget for the director to determine how they will deliver that early literacy plan. So making sure we're preparing well ahead allows us that opportunity to be strategic. And I just want to throw out there, if you want to have any questions as we go forward, please just interrupt me or throw them in the chat. I get going again. Like I said, this is really exciting stuff for me. I know not everybody's excited about it, but I love this stuff. So then as we look at our agenda, what should be on that? It needs to be in a consistent format. really keep it consistent so it's easy for the public to see, easy for the school to understand, those that work within the school, and easy for board members. Make sure that we're covering the most important items first. Again, if we hit that 2-hour mark and we haven't discussed what's most important, our discussion is not going to be as thorough as it would have been if we had taken on that topic first. We'll be off topic a lot, have a lot of side conversations going on. So make sure we're getting those most important agenda items first. Make sure they're numbered so it's really easy to see the flow. And on the right side of the screen, you can see just a sample agenda. It's really easy to see because they're numbered and we can see what is included in reports. We know we're going to talk about the director's report, the board members report, the financial reports, and even what financial reports we're going to see. If the director's report was going to include state test scores, then that could be listed as a sub item there. So it's just really clear. And then really state the minutes that the discussion will take. And as you can see here on this sample one, we've got, 7 o'clock, 7:35, 7:55. We didn't say it's going to take 5 minutes, but we can see the flow of the meeting, how long each item should take. And that keeps us on top and that topic. And that also allows us to see if we've created an agenda that's going to take more than 2 hours. In that preparation phase, if we can see that the discussion really to have thoughtful discussion on every item on the agenda is going to be more than 2 hours, then we need to start asking ourselves, do we need a second board meeting this month? Or are there some items on this agenda that can wait till the next month? Again, making sure we're prioritizing and being strategic and getting the reactionary things that we need to take care of, but being respectful of board members and staff members' times. And then I really think your agenda needs to be focused on accountability and strategy. And so I've kind of broken down the 5 main areas the boards are really accountable to. First of all is finance. We are accountable to the state of Utah and the taxpayers that pay the funding that comes into our school. So we should be having about a 20-minute discussion on finance every meeting. And that should not simply be somebody presenting the finance report. There should be questions asked. We should delve into it. We shouldn't just trust the one board member that is the finance expert on the board to ask all the questions. And for those of you that are authorized by the State Charter School Board, I know that they have staff members that are currently going through your minutes and looking at that finance point on your board, making sure that board members really are asking financial questions and that they understand the finance. So make sure that's included in your minutes. We should be spending about 20 minutes on academics. That's why we're here. We are a school. We should focus on academics. We should never have a board meeting that has no academic focus to it, no academic discussion. Then that just means we have drifted off from our purpose of being a school. So we should be seeing during academics both reactionary stuff, how did the school do on test scores in the past, as well as having discussions on moving forward. These are the current benchmarks and where we're at, and having the school director, CEO explain how we're going to move to the next level. We should spend some time on our charter, making sure we're fulfilling those charter goals and the obligations that we have laid out in our charter. If we only do that once a year, and you get to that once a year assurance checklist, it could be really eye-opening that, oh, wait a sec, we didn't cover all of this stuff. Oh no. But if we're seeing that on a monthly cycle, we're going to make sure that we're doing everything we said we would do with our authorizer. I really think that we should spend some time on training. As the association, we make that really simple. This summer, we released some really easy 5 to 15-minute videos that could be watched during a board meeting. We also, like this presentation today, will be posted on our website, and you could play it in its entirety at a board meeting. We also come in and do custom trainings for your boards on a particular topic that you would like to hear about. So spend that time training, because time vested in training makes you a stronger board and allows you to fulfill your responsibilities. You're not backpedaling. And then assurances, reviewing policy and law. We should be reviewing, and Nyman and I talked about this at the beginning, making sure that we're not just asking questions, but verifying. Is this policy? Are we doing what we say in the policy? And what supporting documents can a director bring to say, yes, we're fulfilling our fee waiver policy? We have this many students on fee waivers. We handed out the papers at this time, and really bring the data that backs up those questions. So we should be reviewing policy and law, because remember at the very beginning, that's what we're here for, is to make sure we follow state law. And then board business, that's where we're actually approving new policy or making decisions. That's really only 20% of our board meeting, the decision-making process of the board. So make sure we're including that finance and academics and charter fidelity in our board meetings. And you'll see that breaks out to a nice 2-hour meeting. Some meetings may be a little heavier in finance and a little less on academics, or you may have an hour-long academic discussion and not any training in the meeting. But we want to make sure that over a year's span, we're spending equal time in each of these areas. Does anybody have any questions on the accountability and strategy?
No.
Okay, and then how can we make sure, and then these are just some questions that are commonly asked. So how do we make sure meetings are strategic and not merely reactionary? That goes back to that planning out, looking at your calendar ahead of time, maybe doing a board retreat where we really look at the big picture and then narrow it down as to how we're going to fulfill that in each board meeting. But there's a lot of ways that if we start talking about it, that we become more strategic in our board meeting planning. What are some strategies for improving our board meetings? And we see this a lot, but set up a context for issues and discussion, and distinguish between routine and strategic issues. Some routine things is you should be receiving a financial report at every board meeting. So that's a routine thing. It's crucial and it's important, and it needs to be on your board agenda, but make sure that we're not filling our board agendas with strictly routine items, but that we have those strategic issues, looking at goals and how we're going to move forward, and possibly if goals need to change. You know, I sit on a charter that's been around for I think 16, 17 years, and we set goals back in year 3. We shouldn't be operating off of those goals from year 3. Hopefully those have been achieved and we're moving forward. If we're still looking at goals from year 3, we need to spend some time on strategic issues, because our community is different. In those 15 years, the kids that were kindergartners have long graduated. So we need to be strategic. We need to distinguish between governance and management. Governing a school and looking at how well we're doing versus how will we do things. Now that doesn't mean a board will never address a how will question. There are times, and especially when we're looking at strategy, but typically as a board, we need to focus on how well we're doing and let the CEO share and bring forward the how will we move forwards. Make sure that each person has an opportunity to speak. And this is so important. And I see this on the board that I serve. I'm a very dominant person. I love to speak at a board meeting, and I have a comment on everything, but I need to be very aware of my other colleagues. The board I serve on, the board chair is actually very quiet and reserved, and he won't just jump in and go. He carries the meeting forward, but sharing his thoughts and opinions, he's very reserved on that. So we need to make sure that he has that opportunity. And the last board meeting I sat in, I realized at the end that I had done a terrible job as a board member, because there was another board member that had not weighed in on anything because I dominated. So we need to look at, are you the domineering personality? And step back and make sure that the others feel included, that you're not just running a one-man show. And providing those opportunities. And if you're the more reserved board member, you need to speak up. You're on the board because your background and your opinions and your values matter, and they need to be shared. And it's really up to the board chair to make sure that that's navigating, but then also look and see what role you play. I'm not the board chair, but I need to not dominate. And then make sure we're managing our meetings. I really like that idea. Oh, go ahead. Nope, okay, just background chatter.
I'm on a Zoom meeting.
to make sure that. And then make sure that we're monitoring our own questions and our own processes, that we're really seeing how we move forward as a board, and make sure that we have access to relevant information. I was at a board meeting and there was really apparent there was a board member that was frustrated beyond belief. He was so frustrated, he was actually angry, and you could see that in his comments. And as I talked to him after the board meeting, it really came down to he didn't have the information he needed to make decisions, and he really valued that role that he filled on the board, as bringing his thoughts and his opinions and his background, but not having access to information ahead of time was very frustrating to him, because he couldn't weigh in and deliberate as effectively as if he'd had time to digest and research the information presented. That's why it is so important that those board meeting packets are a full packet and they're delivered a good week before a board meeting, so everybody has time to do that. Make sure we're asking tough questions and then following through with them. Not just asking, but verifying that the information is accurate. Now, that does not mean that as board members we get to go rogue and go in and dig up all kinds of information. That verification should be assigned at the board meeting. As we ask a question and an answer is given, if verification is needed, the board chair should assign somebody to go and verify, and with the method of that verification. And so that's really important that we allow ourselves to do that as board members, to go in and verify and gather the data, but that it is really clear whose responsibility that is. Otherwise, the poor CEO or director of the school spends the whole next week after a board meeting entertaining each individual board member as they go on fact-finding missions. And again, we want to respect the CEO and director's time and allow them to bring forward that verification and data, but to also run the school. And then if a board decides to delegate any work, make sure that as that delegation goes to a committee, that we do that delegation through a motion, and that we approve the process of who's going to be on that committee and the parameters of that work, what they need to do. And that should all be defined in a motion, so it's very clear to the board, to the director or CEO of the school, and to the broader school community whose responsibility it is to take on this task. And especially during COVID, we've really kind of tunnel visioned in, and every decision right now is completely COVID related. But we need to kind of step back too and focus some on that strategy as to how does these COVID decisions marry up with our charter, and how are we moving forward and ensuring that we're staying true to our vision and mission of our school while dealing with COVID, that we haven't become so tunnel focused in our strategy and decisions. Is it good for a board to always have consensus, to always be in agreement? And I want to really debunk the myth that consensus does not mean unanimity. I'm not even going to say that word right, that everybody is unanimous or in total agreement. And it doesn't mean that everybody gets their choice. What consensus means is we have deliberate discussions that take forward, and everybody's opinions get to be brought forward, and then a decision of the whole is made as we move forward. So again, consensus doesn't mean that it's all one way, or that it's always my way or the highway. It means that we spend time in deliberation and make sure that every point of view is represented. If we're always unanimous, then we have a couple problems that could be happening. And one of them is that our board is lacking the diversity of opinions and perspectives required to face the challenges of the charter school. So we need to make sure that we really have that diversity in our board, and that we allow that diversity to be presented at the board meeting, that those different thoughts and opinions and backgrounds get to be brought forward as we make decisions. But one more important thing on this too is we need to note that once a decision has been made by the board, whether you're on the yes side or the no side, that the entire board moves forward in support of that decision. So we had an opportunity to present our views and our thoughts and our backgrounds, but once the decision's made, we move forward in support, especially to our broader community. And that's where we're unanimous in our support. Any questions on that?
I have a question, Jorlyn.
Go ahead.
On the part where we are talking about a slide or two back, where you're talking about reports, yeah, that slide there, where about delegating the work. You know, that it seems like that there are some reports that most of the time it is me, the executive director, that is talking to the board. Occasionally, or the financial officer, the business manager is talking to the board, and the board is receiving that information. Occasionally, we might have somebody from the outside giving a report to the board. For example, the time when the audit takes place, right? The auditors will interpret that. But it's really rare that the board itself does its own investigating. And it seems to me that would be healthy, for example, whatever it is, rather than just saying, you know, Mr. Executive Director, come and tell us how, you know, report on X, Y, and Z. It seems to me that it'd be healthy if the board would assign a board member or a committee to learn that, and they give the report in the board meeting. I'm wondering if that happens in other boards, or if that's something that just doesn't really, boards don't see it as that is their role.
I really like it when I see that happening in a board. It really shows that a board is engaged in the presentation, because a director's report is typically given in a written format, so they shouldn't spend the majority of the time at the board meeting speaking. So that goes back to this accountability. Oops. And then here, as we develop that calendar out, if we take some time in a retreat at the beginning and then just annually update it, we can start to make those assignments out. John, you're gonna, be over academics. Will you make sure that you get with the director ahead of time and are prepared to bring that academic report forward? So we can start to sign that out as we look at strategically what needs to be on each board meeting agenda and how we develop that, looking at it as a year schedule. I really like that. And then the important thing on that too is to make sure that when we assign that out, we do it in a motion so it's really clear. So John, I move that John is going to oversee the academic report this month. He's going to get with the director and bring that forward in March and April, and he's going to develop a committee of 4 members. Really clear in that motion what they're going to do, who's going to do it, and those parameters. I saw a board meeting once where they had a whole 1 page. They were going to form a committee or a task force to look at a middle school reconstruction. And in their board agenda documents that came forward was the motion to do that, who was going to serve on the committee, and what those parameters were. So the motion then was to approve this document, but it was so clear. Everybody knew exactly how this middle school reconstruction task force was going to move forward and what the end results or what would come back to the board would be. So not necessarily what the task force would decide, but what they would bring back to the board. So that really is a crucial element in a board meeting, is to make sure that everybody is participating and it's not just simply a receiving of reports from the CEO.
Very good, thank you.
And then the last thing I really want to cover is that we should be evaluating. Board members and board meetings, we need to evaluate them to know where our weaknesses are and where our strengths are and how to move forward. And so we should evaluate them both on a monthly cycle, and that could be as simple as, a thumbs up, a thumbs down. How do you think the board meeting went? Were we focused on governance and then everybody goes thumbs up or thumbs down, or maybe it's in the middle? Did we get into the weeds? Were we making more how-will decisions? And everybody can quickly just do that at the end of the meeting and take a note. It can be really formal, where you have a form that you fill out and assign a board member to fill out the form each month. You could have somebody in your public fill out an evaluation form. I went to a board meeting once and I sat down, and the board chair right before the meeting came up and brought me a form and said, our board is committed to making sure we are the best governing board around. Will you please evaluate this board meeting while you sit here and fill out this form? Now, this board chair had no idea I was coming. They were just looking for somebody in attendance to fill out an evaluation and to give feedback from a different perspective on how that board meeting went. It's very appropriate to ask the CEO or a key staff member to evaluate the board meeting to make sure that we're moving forward in effectiveness. They're not rating the board, they're rating the board meeting, how the board meeting went. And there are so many forms that we could look at and tools that you can utilize for that. We have some on the UAPCS website. You can just Google Charter School Board Evaluation Form and a whole slew will show up. So find one that fits the personality of your board, but make sure you're doing that evaluation because that drives how you perform. It's just like we evaluate the school, we evaluate the CEO evaluates the teachers. We're not doing it to be punitive, we're doing it to be better. And so really focusing in and making sure we're evaluating our board meetings. And then just to close up and wrap up, board time is precious and it should be used efficiently. And if we're not, then we need to retool and rethink and redesign how we're functioning as a board and as a relationship between our board and our CEO or school director to make sure that that time is used well, because there is a high cost for a board meeting. We hire our CEO, he's there in attendance, that's time on the clock, as well as every board member. So if we added it up and just said simply that each board member in attendance made roughly $30 an hour and you have 5 board members, that's $150 times 1 hour. If you go 2 hours, that's $300. If you add in your CEO's time, you can see that it really does have precious and a monetary value to your board meetings. So we owe it to the public to make sure that we are efficient. Mm-hmm. And with that, I want to just turn the time over to some questions that you have on board meeting effectiveness. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. So next month on October 5th, we will have a lunchtime seminar at the same time on Monday, October 5th at noon. And we'll be going over parent volunteers and PTOs and how they interact with both the board and the director and how to make that relationship seamless. Real quick, let me make sure I can do this. Yes, I have just entered into the chat an evaluation form, again, making sure that we value your time as participants in this training and make sure that we have very informative trainings for you. So if you'll take 5 minutes at the most and quickly fill that out, it's also in the email that I sent out for those that pre-registered for the training today. If you'll fill that out, we can fine tune these and make sure that we are not wasting your time as well and covering topics that are important to you. So I look forward to seeing you on the 5th. If you have any questions, feel free to hang out for a second more, or you can always just reach me by email or giving me a phone call. Have a great week.